I walked past my son in an airport 3 years ago. He was close enough that I could have reached out and touched his shoulder. And I didn't. I let him walk away. My name is George. I am 79 years old. And I have spent every day since that afternoon asking myself whether what I did in that moment was the greatest act of love I have ever managed or the greatest act of cowardice I will ever have to live with. I want to tell you about that day. But to do that honestly, I have to go back a little further because the airport was not where the story began. The story began 16 years before that, on a November evening in our kitchen, when my son David looked at me across the dinner table and told me he was done. Not angry, not shouting. He was 26 years old and he was calm in a way that was worse than any argument we had ever had. And he said he needed to stop trying to be close to someone who made him feel invisible. And then he stood up, put his plate in the sink, and walked out of the house. And I sat there at that table for a long time. And I told myself he would come back when he cooled down. He did not come back. I will not pretend I did not understand why he left. I understood. I was not a cruel man. I was not a violent man. But I was a closed one. I was the kind of father who came to every school event and remembered nothing about them afterward. Who asked how your day was and then looked back at the television before you finished answering. Who said I love you at the end of phone calls the way other people say goodbye, as a formality, a signal that the conversation was over. David used to try. For years he tried. He would call and suggest we meet for lunch. He would ask me questions about my own father, about my childhood, about things I had never talked about with anyone. And I would answer in short sentences and change the subject because sitting inside those conversations felt like standing in a room with no ceiling, too much open air, nothing to hold on to. I did not know how to be known by my own son, and eventually he stopped trying to know me. The first 5 years after he left, I was mostly angry. I told myself he was dramatic, that he had always been sensitive, that the world had taught his generation to walk away from anything uncomfortable and call it healing. I said these things to myself and sometimes to his mother, who disagreed quietly and said nothing more, because she knew me well enough to know that the anger was sitting on top of something else entirely. By the 10th year, I had stopped being angry. What replaced it was harder to name. It was not quite grief. It was more like a low, constant awareness that something was missing. The way a room feels different when a piece of furniture you have owned for 30 years is suddenly gone. Not dramatic, just different. Just a change in the shape of things. I did not try to contact him. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it. I picked up the phone more times than I can count. I wrote letters I never sent. But there was always something that stopped me. Some voice in my head that said he made his choice, or that it had been too long now, or that reaching out would only cause more pain, or, and I am not proud of this, that if I reached out and he did not respond, I would have to stop pretending that somewhere, in some version of things, the door was still open. The silence at least allowed me to imagine that reconciliation was still possible. Reaching out would have made the silence his decision instead of just the weather between us. I was at the airport on a Thursday afternoon in February. I was flying back from visiting my sister in another city, nothing significant, a long weekend, a quiet visit. The terminal was full in the way airports always are, that specific kind of crowd where everyone is moving in their own direction, with their own urgency, and no one is paying attention to anyone else. I had found my gate, I had sat down, and then I stood up again because I needed water, and I was walking toward a small shop near the gate when I saw him. I knew it was David before I had consciously registered his face. It was something in the way he moved. He has always walked a specific way, slightly forward-leaning, like he is arriving somewhere important. He was maybe 15 feet away from me, moving in the opposite direction, pulling a small carry-on behind him, and he was looking at his phone. He was 38 years old, and he looked like himself, older, a little heavier in the shoulders, a beard I had not seen before, but entirely, unmistakably himself. And I stopped walking, and I watched him come toward me and then move past me without looking up. 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, past me, and gone into the crowd. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably less than a minute, and I thought about calling his name. I rehearsed it in my head, the exact sound of it, David, just one word, the way I used to call him in from the backyard when he was small. And I did not say it. I walked to the shop. I bought a bottle of water. I went back to my gate. I sat down and I watched the planes move slowly on the tarmac outside the window, and I thought about what I had just done, or what I had just failed to do, and I could not decide which it was. The flight home was 2 hours. I spent most of it trying to understand my own silence back there. Part of me said I'd spared him something, that seeing me suddenly without warning in a crowd might have been painful or unwelcome, that he had built a life in those 16 years, a life I knew nothing about, and that appearing in it without permission would have been a kind of intrusion, even if I had not meant it that way. That sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is remain absent from someone who is better without them. I have heard people say that. I've read it somewhere, and sitting on that plane I tried to believe it because it made what I did feel like a decision rather than a failure. But there was another part of me, quieter, more honest, that knew I had stood there in that airport and been afraid. Afraid that he would look at me with nothing. Afraid that after 16 years, the only thing worse than missing him would be discovering that he did not miss me. Afraid that the open door I had been imagining all those years was not open at all, had not been open for a long time, and that some part of me had preferred not knowing to finding out. Cowardice dressed up as consideration. That is what I was sitting with on that flight home. I do not know where David is now. I do not know if he is married or whether he has children of his own. I do not know if he thinks about me. I think about him every day, not in a dramatic way, just the way you think about something that is always slightly present, the way you are always aware of a window even when you are not looking at it. I am 79 years old, and I have more time behind me than in front of me, and I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because at this point in a life you stop being able to pretend that the things you have not done will somehow still get done. The letter I never sent is still unsent. The phone call I rehearsed 100 times was never made. And in an airport on a Thursday afternoon, I stood close enough to say one word and said nothing. I do not know if love sometimes means letting someone live without you. I told myself that on the plane, and I have told myself that since. But I think if I am being fully honest with you, the way I have tried to be honest this whole time, that I am still not sure I did it for him. I think I may have done it for myself, to protect myself from a door that might finally, after all this time, turn out to be a wall. And if that is true, then what I am living with is not a sacrifice. It is just one more moment in a long life of choosing distance when closeness was available and terrifying and possible. If you have someone you have been meaning to reach out to, someone you lost track of or pushed away, or simply let the years carry further from you than you ever intended, I am not going to tell you what to do. I am not in a position to tell anyone what to do. But I will tell you this. Airports are busy places. People move quickly, and a person who matters to you can walk past within arm's reach and be gone in a moment, back into a life you are no longer part of. And you will spend a long time afterwards sitting by windows wondering what would have happened if you had simply said their name.